I'm Matt Garnier, and this is Interminable. If you're listening on YouTube, this podcast is also on every other listening platform that you probably use. And if you're on one of those, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, whatever, hey, it's also on YouTube. Sometimes we got visuals, sometimes we don't. Actually, there's not a we anymore. It's really just me. That's weird. Anyway, Interminable is everywhere and on social media. Please follow and subscribe, and I'll make sure you don't regret it. I can't guarantee that. Anyway, here's my talk with Dr. Jonathan Giles. All right, we've talked about several different ways to start this podcast, but which one are we going with?
Is this the actual beginning? We can go back to if I'm a doctor or not.
We can do one of those classic awkward, we don't know how to podcast beginnings, which is the new trendy thing to do when you start a podcast.
Yeah, that was done.
You act like you don't know. Oh, is this thing on?
What was that I was listening to? It was an NPR show that they were doing by Zoom, and then they were broadcasting it. So you can't see anything. That's the awkward part. So you can see absolutely nothing, but you hear exactly like you said. Is this on? Can you? And they're playing the Zoom sounds on the background. I was like, really?
Yeah.
I subscribed to this, and yet I was sucked in and kept listening to it. So it was like, anyway, moving on.
I would say actually that this whole pandemic quarantine situation has exposed how generally we're still pretty bad at using the internet. Like culturally, in a general sense, like this is what we have now, and it's like,
yeah,
it's not just like old people don't know how to use Zoom. It's like in a bigger sense, we don't know how to utilize it efficiently to connect, how to really like do education on this whole new platform, which could be the best educational tool ever.
Yeah, that goes way back to Steve Jobs-isms. When the iPad first came out, and I'm loosely quoting here from the day that Jobs walks out on stage, and he has, the first thing was that he had an envelope, and then it was in the MacBook Air. And then the second one was he walks out on stage and he's got this thing, and originally was called the Apple Slate, but it became the iPad modeled after the iPhone because there was a whole release thing with that way back in the day. But the original concept for the iPad was to be a all-in-one comprehensive solution for students that could be deployed anywhere at any time, that would give them all of their textbooks, all of the material that they would need, would provide connection to the internet, would let them do their assignments, would provide an LMS. And Apple's very interested in this, even still. I have a cousin who works for the company, not speaking for them, but just knowing their experiences. They love education. There's a Steve Jobs initiative inside of Apple to give back to education because that's the foundation. If we're going to chuck education in this whole process, we're going to lose. And there's a lot of articles out right now about that, op-eds. We're not going to know the impacts and let me go back and say that researchers don't like the term impact, but we're not going to know the effects of this for years down the road. What happens when a whole group of people, a whole cohort of people gets behind, basic math skills, basic rhetoric skills, the ability to analyze content. What happens? And so for all of these parents out there that are trying to make this work, my heart's out to them. As a single guy, I'm thinking, wow, this is rough. I'm trying to think, even as someone who's inside of that bubble that, does a little bit of higher ed and on the side is teaching, what is that, how do we give back in a time of physical distancing, separation? And I see these teachers that are out on Zoom or doing classes by way of Skype. And I think, wow, there are some people who really get it. And then there's some that are, like you said, still kind of stuck in this mentality. I don't want to take away from the face-to-face, but, our greatest tool has almost become, a banal ritual for us, that we're stuck in the social media and news aspects of it.
Right.
And not leveraging its full power.
It's still, like, in the timeline of human history, it's a brand new toy. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. I mean, we've got online school is like a bigger industry than residential, but it's still trying to approximate the old way of doing things.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that in a lot of the ways that we push things out. I know just talking to my colleagues when I go out on the field that work in accreditation or systems, both for state public health departments as well as educational enterprises, is that, what are we flexing into with the internet? What are we utilizing as far as resources? And I remember being in a meeting one time and somebody said, PowerPoint is really a thing of the past. If you're banking on PowerPoint being your go-to skill for the workforce, you're already 20 years behind.
Yeah.
And that hit me because I think we live and die by PowerPoint usually, and especially in management or case presentation scenarios. I mean, just watching the daily briefings and stuff that goes on, PowerPoint is a part of everything. We have a slide for how many slides are going to be in the presentation. There's so many other ways to deliver information.
It's
now.
very in the box.
Yeah, it's like even podcasting. I was talking to as a part of the head educational officer for a men's fraternity for the entire state. We're talking about just email is too slow. We're even talking about a podcast, trying to get stuff up and running. And so I was like, we just utilize the resources.
Yeah,
you put it out there. I mean, the more information we get out, the faster, the better.
As long as humans are trained to receive it.
Okay, yeah, that's a whole nother topic.
That is another topic.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah. So before we launch into all of that, in case we didn't yet record anything with which to introduce you, Dr. Jonathan Giles, can you quickly introduce listeners to your credentials and any position or accolades you care to introduce with?
What is it? How do I title myself now? Lord, Reverend, Dr. That's a running joke. In my family, that's a running joke.
Okay, well, we're all in now.
Yeah, well, no, that was, you go online and you can always do the click for ordain me now button. Yeah,
and then have you done it?
I did that, and then paid for the Scottish title for the Lord. So I guess it just goes in order: Lord, Doctor, John, Reverend, Lord, Doctor. There we go. Let's get them in the right order. Mm-hmm. No, I mean, my background is I'm a Virginia native. I'm a local boy. I actually grew up on a farm. Most people don't know that. So by way of introductions, I grew up in an actual village of less than what feels like less than 1,000 people, but tiny place. Grew up on a farm, only child, first to go to college in the nuclear family, first to get a master's degree in the broader family, only person in the broad family to have a doctorate. And so there's a broad swath there, but credentials include degrees in public health. So my background's global health. I look at cross-cultural and different types of programs that reach just beyond the boundaries of America. But I'm trained in all the different types of health promotion and education modalities. And my doctorate is from Nova Southeastern University in Florida, and I specialize in global epidemiology. So not just epidemiology for one area, it's looking at what's going on collectively, which is basically everything that you see in the news right now is my skill set in an area. So those are my specific areas. My research topics include water and sanitation, and my passion is a relatively new field, which is public mental health, or public mental health sanitation is one of the other terms that's used interchangeably with public mental health. So that's a little bit of my background and where I came from, and just have a love for helping people generally, and then utilize the resources and education for that.
And why did you choose that route?
Why did I choose that? I was actually pre-med when I started college and hated chemistry. No, that's always a running joke. I had a hard time with the concepts of chemistry, and kind of fell in love with this education opportunity, and had a really wonderful professor who was a certified health education specialist that just kind of convinced me to look at things a little bit differently, look at how we can prevent people from getting sick as opposed to just treating them on site. And that's no bash against my colleagues that work in the healthcare system. It's just that we work hand in hand. So the baseline is that I found out that what I thought was medicine was really just an intervention, healthcare delivery. It was helping the individual. What I could do with health education, health promotion, and then later public health was help a whole population. So took a few classes, fell in love with the area of study, fell in love with psychology, big part of that. That was my undergraduate minor. Still have a huge love for psychology. Stay in touch with all of my colleagues that work in the mental health side of things.
What was the primary draw for you to the sanitation aspect?
So Adlerian psychology really pushes the idea that therapy and mental wellness is not something that's reactive. Alfred Adler was big on people receiving help before they got to the point that they were trained to understand their emotions and how to react to different scenarios. And that's something that I don't think that we do very well in a modern society that's very well developed. Going back to the original discussion about the internet, we don't do that very well just collectively. Part of it is that, we chalk things up, and I'm a byproduct of the 90s, so I think everybody that I knew was taking Adderall. And again, no disrespect to anybody in the medical community. It's just it was the era. It was the era for ADD, ADHD. And I remember being told in my teens that my family physician really wanted me, or my pediatrician really wanted me to go be tested for ADD and ADHD. And we never really pursued that path. And so, I don't have a diagnosis, but later in life dealing with other things, and I'm very open about my past dealing with depression and suicidal ideation. I look back and think, could we have done something better to address this? Because there's a large portion of our population, I don't have the specifics and the data on that, but there's a large portion of our population that either suffers with a mental illness that is undiagnosed, or diagnosed and being treated, and they're still continuing to receive treatment. And in the current situation, it's even more important with what we talk about as far as individuals seeking help, not being able to socialize and things like that. And so looking back and thinking, are there ways that we could have helped people before we got to this point to be able to, identify where feelings come from, how to handle emotions, how to handle their own psychology, prep people for these types of things. It's a big help, but at the same time, now we're in the middle of a pandemic. How do we respond and help individuals?
Right. And maybe in the big picture, we end up learning things we otherwise wouldn't have
always
identified.
Always.
Are you of the feeling that the prescription route was and is generally too broad strokes, or just that it needs to be supplemented with more causal theory and understanding?
So I have a good friend who has dealt with some struggles of mental health, and he told me when I started down my path of dealing with what I was dealing with, is that don't expect things to be a one and done type situation.
Right.
If you may find something that works for you and it's going to work for a little while, but don't become dependent on it. All of these things are tools. We are the masters of our domain, if you will, to kind of throw that around. But, if we're going to solely rely on pharmacology, or we're solely going to rely on therapy, it takes the onus off of the individual, and it puts it on whatever that treatment type is. And that's not always healthy. Examining if the pharmacology helps, good. If the counseling or therapy helps, good. I've known people that even will use things like electroconvulsive therapy when it gets to a point that they can't deal with depression. And I don't judge that. A lot of people think it's barbaric that we still do that. It's done a lot better than it was done. We understand a lot more about the human brain now than we used to. So this whole mentality of where we're at, if we get stuck or we pigeonhole people into one type of treatment, it gets dangerous. So considering the individual and where they're at is a big part of what's going on. But back to my specialty, considering what's going on in the collective is also really important.
Would you say, let's say like somebody is experiencing what feels like clinical depression due to a circumstance like this one. They're shut in, they're socially isolated, all of that. Is medicine right for them? Or would you say that that's more of a, let's deal with the situation? Is it something that, you kicks in at a time like this?
So, again, this is one of those times where as a public health professional and health educator, what I would say is pump the brakes and talk to your clinician, talk to your doctor, because, I can't prescribe anything, first and foremost, because it's not my credentials. And secondly, because it's, you need to talk to the individual who's providing your care. What I will say is in a time like this is not the time to remain silent. A lot of times the Protestant work ethic has taught us collectively as a country, and the roots are still there. It doesn't matter what mentality you come from. It doesn't matter what tradition or ideology you come from. American dream and ideology has instilled that we are all working to be our best. And part of that is suffering in silence. This is not really a time to suffer in silence. It's to speak up and ask for help. And there's no shame in that. And what I see a lot of, and what we're dealing with right now and talking to people is, if you need to reach out and talk to somebody, do it. But I tell people all the time, talk to your clinician. See if they can help you with something, because there are some short-term effects that can be fixed with pharmacology. But what I think we're seeing a lot more of is, and again, looping back around to the conversation about the internet, is we're just learning so much more about ourselves because we're in untested waters. This is we're talking about a decade since the last one of these pandemics. In the last pandemic, we didn't even have telephones.
Which one do you see as the last pandemic?
The 1918 Spanish flu.
A century, not a decade.
Yeah. Sorry. Let's put it in a little bit different. It is still decades, but it
is decades. Yeah.
The power of 10. But going that far back to the Spanish flu, and we look at those effects, even before the Great Depression, we survived. Humanity survived, and so what does that showcase to us from then and now? My grandmother, who recently passed away, going on 2 years ago, was born at the beginning of the Depression and has vivid memories of what it was like, and journaled the entire time and gave us a retrospect. But even at that, it's individual to the person. So to say that the feelings right now are characteristic to what's going on, you can chalk some of it up to that, yeah, where there's some social isolation. But by the same token, what can we do to make you better tomorrow,
right,
as compared to today?
Well, this is another novelty in the big timeline of history, is that it's kind of fairly recent, like with the advent of progressive medicine and technology and everything, is that we're able to prioritize the individual a lot more in terms of like even your own self-worth. Mm-hmm. Is like it's not okay if we throw your life away for some meaningless patriotic or otherwise kind of cause. Like every individual matters, whereas when that was not a tenable philosophy, you could throw away lives, and not just throw away, but chalk it up to big picture, it's okay kind of thing. And yet we still have the problem of the individual doesn't want to be ashamed of their own condition. Do you think that is the main driving force, shame in not seeking help?
I'll say within, and let me speak from a personal perspective, is within a religious community where that came up. Yes, shame was from a personal perspective. Any type of mental illness or a condition. Let's just go with condition. There's a kind of an unspoken understanding that I'm defective. And that, again, that's my personal experience. I'm defective. There's something wrong with me. And, it was the biology of it is that both sides of my family have suffered with different types of depression. And so genetically, I was the perfect storm. And it came down to the point where, my physician pulls a panel and goes, "You don't have serotonin." And so I was like, okay, I don't know what that means. Did a little bit of research, and it's like, oh, I can't be happy. Yeah. I can't regulate my own happiness. And I was like, okay, and that's a very broad brush to paint with there. But going back to that is that, I had people that would say, from my tradition and background, oh, just pray it away. God will take care of you. Just pray it away. And I even had someone go as far as to say, your pharmacology and your intervention from that perspective using drugs is a sin. Broad stroke there, sin. This is not God's purpose for you. And I mean, that put me in a worse depression than having a diagnosis, because I'm thinking, now I'm not only am I defective, I'm also doing something wrong. So there's shame on shame in that case. And it took somebody saying, well, think about it this way. If you break your arm, are you going to put it in a cast, or are you going to pray it away? And that's going back to the individual self-worth. You've got to balance and maintain with your own traditions and your own interest. But overview and the large perspective is that's probably a minority perspective. It's that, there can be some loud speakers on that side of the aisle in some cases. But, I had a lot of people that told me afterwards that said, we're really glad you got some help.
Yeah,
we're really glad that you sought something out, because, and it was hard for them to approach too, because before, I hit my rock bottom, a lot of people would say, you were the guy that we were always happy to be around because you're always smiling, you're always happy. And there was a huge change, and now we're glad to see you back to that. And I'm never one to say that I'm perfect in any means. No, I'm glad I feel better. I'm glad that I'm able to regulate and do better as an individual to help people. But by the same token, it's an individual perspective, and I still struggle with the idea that I'm defective, and I don't want to be. But at the same time, it's the condition of humanity in a way, is that we're going to bear some shame for that, and I've learned to cope with it in some ways through some remarkable people, but it's a daily thing.
Right. So I can testify to the existence of that subculture that might intertwine some shame into, via a spiritual angle into the flaw in your being. But let's also look at the way that might come through just the individualistic culture, which gets to why I merged these two questions kind of. You see yourself as an individual, and that's a highly valued source of identity, right? But that's somehow separate from the neurochemistry. Not saying you specifically, but that is kind of, without going deep into it, that is kind of, I think, the general self-perception is I'm something other than my neurochemistry. So then if there's mental illness, then I can just say that's a little disease. But what is the self other than the machinery? It's like, it's still okay to be flawed. So I don't try to dismiss it as, I just have a part that's wrong. It's not me. It's a part of me. Like I have struggled terribly with OCD and like anxiety and related things like that. And sometimes the mantra of like, you are not your disease. I'm like, I kind of am. I kind of am this brain, So like, I think the sense of self-worth that combats shame needs to come from a place of, this is just what was born. I just, and then realizing and embracing the fact that it is these friends, these circumstances that come along in your life that undo the damage that's been inflicted, or the flaws that are innate.
I mean, yeah, we can be reduced to the sum total of our parts. I mean, but I get, and the biggest tome that I brought with me was it's actually, for anybody listening that has any connection to Freemasonry, is Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike. And it sounds, it's one of these big heavy reads. It's the size of the Manhattan phone book. But there's a quote in here that I really like. And going back to the original part of that is, what is us? And I choose to define it this way. And my goal through this as a member of a men's fraternity that spans the globe is not to convince anyone of my perspective. It's just to provide the basis for, my interest, my beliefs, and then let you make your own decision. Pike wrote back during the Civil War. He was writing this giant book, revising it, I should say. But one of the things that he wrote in here, and it echoes today, and it's in a very large building in Washington, D.C. called the House of the Temple, which is the headquarters of the Scottish Rite, that what we do for ourselves dies with us. What we do for others echoes through eternity. And I think that goes back to, your statement about the other people and the things that we encounter. We can get so tied up in the individual and being represented by our condition or whatever circumstances we're in. It's the things that we do for others that is really what's remembered in part of that. And I think, that's a good representation. That's what gets me out of myself a lot of times, gets me beyond my own mind in that condition. Because I know I have several friends who, you can throw around the moniker disabled, you can throw around handicapped. They prefer to be just considered people with a disability that continue to lead a normal life. And some of them who I've known for a long time. I know two girls who just graduated from high school, and they have cerebral palsy and are just vibrant members of society. Going back to, the baseline is, if you want to calculate worth, from birth they weren't really worth a lot, in air quote there, but they've given back so much to society in the things that they say and do. Because in the midst of everything, I look back and I go, wow, what do I have to complain about? And I never want to end up comparing myself to other people, because that gets into a whole microcosm that, you can always think better or worse of yourself in doing that. But again, being subject to one's own chemistry, one's own biology is just such a small part of the whole. being subject to that and saying that, I'm going to reduce myself to the clinical mentality of what I am. I will never forget a quote. When I was in high school, I was at a leadership forum on medicine when I was still interested in going into medicine. And it came from a plastic surgeon of all places, which was really funny. But I was talking to him because I had a colleague or a friend at the time who had just been diagnosed with MS, multiple sclerosis, and they were just so torn apart by the diagnosis, so upset, constant pain, constant living with this mentality that they're going to live with this for the rest of their life, and it's going to be something that takes away the joy of their life. And I had this plastic surgeon was doing just a symposium on some of the things that he had experienced. And I went into it thinking, this is going to be the worst thing ever. I did not want to go to this session, but I was kind of sorted into it and said, there's no one in this room, go listen to this guy type thing. And I was like, this is going to be awful. It's going to be how he, injects people's lips or, tucks the back of their head and stuff like that. He told stories about how 90% of his work is actually helping people who are in automobile accidents look normal again so that they can be comfortable with their own self-image. And I thought, I have a whole new respect for this field.
Yeah.
Because I had this media mentality that it's all, Hollywood, nip tuck type thing. And it's not. That is not that field. It is people who are genuinely need the services. That's 90% of what happens there. But I'll never forget what he said, because we were talking about this and a neurodegenerative disease. And he said, this is what I would tell your friend. Life is like driving a car. When it comes to living with a disease process or living with a condition, we have to learn to not stare in the rearview mirror, because we tend to want to grab onto that rearview mirror and look at the things that have happened and the things that are behind us. You do that, you lose control of the car. I mean, I'm not saying to anybody listen to this, go do that, because it's not good advice. His statement to us was, take your hands off of the rearview mirror, put them on the steering wheel, and look ahead. Check behind you for what you came from, what your basis is, but always be looking to the future, because you have manifest control. You have that ability. Just because the disease is part of the car, makes the car a little bit smaller, doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be boxed into that. You still control where the vehicle goes.
Yeah.
You still control who you are and how you respond to circumstances. And beyond some of the advice that I've already given, that was one of the things that have stuck with me since I was 14. And I've said that to so many people when they're in a situation where they're looking at their life going, what do I do? And even in a time like this, what do I do? It's like, you still have control.
Right.
You the media may tell you something else, but you still have control. You need to do what is going to benefit you in the long run. And I'm not saying that is to go out and take any action you want to, but do things like, in the middle of quarantine, I get out in the middle of the night and I go driving. And it's just because it's cleansing for being stuck inside all day. And I've even done that before we were in a shelter in place. It's a relaxing thing. You've got to find that balance. And that's a big part of what we do. And if we can keep focusing on the future, we can get through this as well.
Can I go back to that quote from,
Sure.
I believe it was a Freemason that you were quoting?
Mm-hmm.
So if what you do for yourself as an individual dies with you, then how does what you do for others have more permanent value? If you as the individual can't justify the somehow enduring value of whatever final thoughts you may have, or something that, if it's even possible, doesn't reach beyond you, how can you assign permanent value to others? And by the same token, I would say, if to someone who is acting selfishly, I'd say, hey, if other people don't matter, then you don't either. So
Mm-hmm.
doesn't it go both ways?
Yeah. I can concede that point, because Pike's overall viewpoint as a leader in the fraternity was to say there's balance and equilibrium. That's, the attainment is for the individual to learn. One of the greatest responsibilities is temperance, not overindulging in something, and then again, not to underindulge or forsake, the things that help you be healthy. So, if we're talking about, you've got to keep the corporal person running. That means you have to sleep. You can't just throw that off and say, but that's selfish. That You've got to balance that. It's when things are in balance, I think we start to learn that the vested interest is actually in others, because we can get so bogged down in the self. And that's actually, close to what Mark Manson has taught in some of his writings and his podcast, is that we get so bogged down in the culture of self, especially in a time when we're separated. One of Mark's recent podcasts was all about how to stay sane during quarantine, how to stay sane when you're maybe by yourself. And part of that is that you have to take a big picture view first and foremost. You got to look at everything in comparison, and then to understand that you got to give back to the individual too, and that may mean doing some things differently. That may mean shared sacrifice in some cases, but collectively overall, we do have to care for the individual. I mean, I don't want to discount that in any way, shape, or form, but the bigger worth when we're operating and giving back, even things like this, I'd posit, this podcast is a service to the public. I mean, it's you're sharing information, and it doesn't really matter in a country that values freedom of speech in the media. We may not agree on everything, and we probably don't, and that's fine. I mean, my mentality has been and continues to be, I want to give back to the population. I want to give back as much as I can. And I have to do that in the best possible economic way that I stay safe, first and foremost, because if I run myself into the ground, then I can't give back. If you have the mentality that you're going to give constantly, you're going to run yourself into the ground. Even people like Mother Teresa had to rest.
Right. And you are best equipped to take care of your vessel.
Yes.
So
yes.
It makes sense that you would allocate your resources to that.
Yeah. So you have to. I mean, don't forsake taking care of yourself. And I think that's the balance between where we started off with this, is to talk about, your mental health is very important at a time like this.
Yeah.
In addition to what you do for other people. I think there's Occam's razor type scenario here. Not making a decision, but there's an Occam's razor that you walk on a daily basis between taking care of oneself and also taking care of the population. So there's some keys and some points to each side, but if you balance to one side or the other, you can fall into the trap of the culture of the self and become self-obsessed, and that leads to a dark place of isolation. Or you can be so obsessed with giving back that you get sick. There are people who overserve in some cases. And, I know a lot of situations, the medical community included, there are some over-serving times that have been going on. And there are individuals who want to go out and over-serve in a way that they think is healthy, and it's really not.
Right. And every individual, I think, has a different threreshold for how much giving good for their own holistic self.
Sure.
Anyway, how attached they are to the communal needs and that sort of thing. Yeah. Your background is pretty tailored to the present situation, as are your interests, I think. So what do you think are the biggest struggles for individuals that maybe a lot of us aren't totally equipped to handle right now, or that collectively we might not be prepared for?
Collectively, I honestly think, and this is personal opinion, totally personal opinion, we're seeing where we've become so isolated in the technological aspect that we've forgotten what it's like to actually be together. The one thing that I hear a lot from people right now is, when can we go to restaurants again? When can I have dinner with my friends? When can I go to the park and play volleyball, stuff like that? And even down to the point that, and there's a subculture there. When can I go to the gym? I miss going and getting on a treadmill. I really do. For some weird reason, I miss going to a gym and getting on a treadmill and watching reruns of NCIS with everybody else, because it's just being around people. Mm-hmm. It's being, we are social creatures. The most ardent introvert, there's a lot of memes out there right now about introverts are so well suited for this, and that's true. But even to some point, we're not islands. We all have a connection to this great cause. I mean, not to get into Gaia theory, but we all have a connection, and eventually you're gonna need to see someone to recharge. It may be a significant other. It could be your family. Even the people up on the space station have connection back home. I mean, you put a person alone long enough, they'll start to degrade.
Yeah. And just the break from routine is it's surprising.
The R word.
Routine?
The R word.
Why is that a trigger?
Well, no, it's not. It's a good word that I think has been forgotten. And again, I'm going to go back and I'm going to steal from Mark Manson. Mark, I'm one of your greatest fans who doesn't email.
Listening.
Yeah, we know he's listening. And I'm going to go back and steal from one of his thoughts, or reshare one of his thoughts. Is that right now we've been in a condition where routine was kind of balked. It was kind of a carefree type mentality, and everybody said, the routine's been interrupted. Well, no, you had a routine. It was just a routine of being, indecisive, if you will. Now we're getting back to being a little bit more deliberate, and I think in this, honestly, in this time frame, I've developed more of a routine of self-care for my physical person than I had before all of this started. So I am trying to eat better. I am trying to lose weight. I'm trying to monitor my vitals and do more for, again, the corporal person, as well as now delving into the mental health aspect, to control the things that are in my sphere. And right now that's my physical person and those decisions. We had routines. It's just that, this is a different routine. And so one of Mark's baselines is that you need to find a routine right now, because your routine has been sacrificed for your health. So find a new routine, and you need to pretty intensely follow that routine. And so that includes when working from home. Yeah, I get up and take a shower. I put on a collared shirt. I put on, at least khakis, if not, dress up. And it puts me in the mentality to work for the rest of the day. And I find that I'm far more productive when I do that. And that's the routine. And I also set a routine that at a appointed time, for me, it's 4:30 or 5 o'clock. I stop. I do something else. I eat dinner. I go out and now I've come to the point that, I want to look at other opportunities to serve people. And so I don't need the money, but I do DoorDash because it's a routine. I have a appointed time, and I can help people who need it. As a healthy single man with low exposure, I can get people food that they probably need, and that's my goal and objective in doing that. But it's also to take time to be introspective. And part of the early routine in this was I think I've cleaned more than I ever have in the middle of all of this.
Me too.
I've been able to do a lot of deep cleaning and realize that this needs to be part of my overall routine post-pandemic.
Yeah.
But also to take stock of life. That it hit me upside the head when at the start of this I took a donation over to the Salvation Army of summer clothes, and the people just broke down crying because they said, we have so much winter wear, we don't have enough to give to people of summer wear. We have people that need short sleeve shirts or nice dress slacks that they can go do job interviews because people are out of jobs right now. We need to give back to our community this way, and our coat closet doesn't just do coats, but everybody thinks of us as a winter wear type coat closet. We need more stuff like this. And I thought, how much more, could we take stock of the stuff that we don't wear and maybe give back to the community? And so I've made it part of, every quarter now I go through my closet, and I'm not going to go Marie Kondo, but
well, a lot of us don't get rid of things until we're like, I absolutely will never need this again.
Yeah.
Zero chance. Instead of saying, hey, there's probably just more value in this for someone else than for me. But we're so consumerist minded. We're like, might matter later. This is my asset for the time being. But that's a whole other thing. I think everything you just said is also just good advice for anyone in a slump or depression, whenever it may be, is just do something that makes you feel like you're either in the service of others or in the betterment of your future self. Like you're on a good trajectory. If you're cleaning something, you're on a good trajectory. If you're learning a new skill, doesn't matter how small it is. It's literally just about which direction you're moving.
Yep.
And not falling static.
So, and Ryan Holiday puts this in Daily Stoic, the book. I recommend it to just about everybody if you're ever interested. And part of the reason that routine is so important to me is, as a student of Stoicism, as a philosophy of taking things as they come, the concept of amor fati, the love of fate, dealing with your circumstances as they are, is that you focus on the here and now, usually with the preparation for the future, but not dwelling on things. And so reading Marcus Aurelius, and one of the greatest military generals of his time during the Grecian Empire, is to look at and the Roman Empire, is to look at how things happen. And so there are three things that Ryan Holiday puts in his book that are in part of the introduction that are very important. As we look at our routine, we have to develop disciplines, and three specifically: discipline of perception, what we see around us and the world that we live in; discipline of action, the decisions and the actions that we take, and what ends are those decisions trying to meet; and the decision of will, how we deal with things that we can't change, how we can attain clear judgment, and how to have a true and genuine understanding of our place in the world. And that's those three principles, understanding where we're at as a part of our routine, is a big part of the personal introspection.
Right. Yeah, we are definitely capable of falling into damaging routines, where on the one hand we have that need for routine, on the other hand our routine is detrimental to our own health.
Yeah.
So good advice from the Stoics. Can you elaborate a little bit for the uninitiated on the philosophy of Stoicism?
Yeah, so it goes
Huge
back.
topic.
Yeah, it's. I actually fell in love with Stoicism through several different ways, shapes, and forms of just reading about it. And so, coming from the tradition of a Protestant Christian faith as a root, there's a lot of interesting things in the meditations, because you can see a lot of parallels. Not ironically, but interestingly, they parallel a lot of the spiritual thoughts from a secular perspective. And so it was interesting to me, because when you get down into the basis and some of the stuff that Holiday, Manson, and some of the other writers have given us, is that the philosophy was actually, it started in Athens by Zeno, and it was the 3rd century BC was really where it started with the Grecians. And the Grecians were really big on philosophy and their basis for discussion and examination and what was going on in life. And so a lot of philosophy that is read in college and is still read in college is in the basis of Greece and Rome, because that's the basis of how we look at things. But you can move through Plato and several of the other great philosophers, but Zeno was the first one to really say, this is where we start. But the baseline for this is Epictetus and Seneca. Those two philosophers were the baseline for asking more about the self, more about the individual perspective, and how we respond to things. And as a baseline, I discussed the love of fate as the baseline for Stoicism, is to find contentment where you're at in life. That's the undergirding, the foundation.
The reason the word Stoic means what it does to us today.
Yes, is to, and it's not to say it's. Thank you for bringing that up, because a lot of people, I think, confuse Stoicism with Stoic ideology. It's not nihilism. There's a big difference. Stoicism is not nihilism in that it's not that all can be reduced to nothing.
Right.
It's more of an understanding that we are in the situation that we are in, and we work with what we have. We can bemoan the things that we don't have, but that's unproductive. We can wish, but without action, nothing happens. And so going from this belief that basically is the undergirding that we work as our own philosophers to examine ourselves, to understand our emotions and how we're obligated to those around us, we come to the point of Marcus Aurelius in the Roman Empire, who was taught by Epictetus and Seneca directly, to examine our lives and to look at how we deal with those disciplines of perception, action, and will, to not dwell on those things which are, shall we say, ill fate, and to not overly rejoice when we have a favorable outcome in something, to take things in stride and to be equal and even as we walk this path of life. And so the baseline is again, it's to to take everything in stride, if you will.
Right.
And you think about it daily as you get up. And the other the capstone to that is if foundation is the lover of fate, the capstone to Stoicism is memento mori, which is always really important to me. And I have a token that I carry around with me usually. And a lot of people think it's really dark. And it applies to, as a Freemason, it also applies to this, because it's a lesson that we're taught in the fraternity, is that memento mori, just basically translated from the Latin, is remember you will die. And it's appointed unto every man. So everybody's going to die. It's the remembering, but it goes further than that, that if today is your last, what are you going to do with it?
But going back to the earlier quote, does it matter? And like, I guess the question, maybe it's rhetorical in a sense, implying, would you use it for the betterment of the collective and of others? Sure.
And I mean, you can go to George Washington even. I mean, I brought Washington's rules for civility, and he's written over 100 of these things. And Washington even talked about doing how you conduct yourself, and how you treat people. And a lot of Washington's rules of civility are really statesmanship baselines. This tiny little book, or just rules for life, are really interesting, and how we work through things. But to live an examined life is to live a full life, even if it's not. If I'm gone in the next 30 seconds, my hope and my wish is that people would look back and say, this is someone who did live an examined life, who did introspect and did understand where he was coming from and where he was going. Not 100% of the time, but had enough forethought and enough insight to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of what's going on right now, is that collectively we're seeing that in the cult of the personality, and I use that term frequently, is that we're kind of tied up in, the all about me moment. And I'm not gonna rush to blame social media for that, because I think that's way too frequent right now. But if we could keep everybody at an arm's distance through the little black box in our hands, is that really healthy? And while, again, that's a tool, a cell phone's a tool, a computer's a tool, and it can bring us together, but it can also so divisively put us apart in some ways. And just the current situation is that routine, going back to that routine is very important. And that includes how you use these communication devices.
There's a lot there, and I agree that sometimes we pin a little bit much on social media. It's good to go back to kind of the commentaries that have existed for far longer than our present moment, where we try to have this empirical lens and say, here's what the problem is. It's like, we can go to older sources and figure out underlying human problems that have been around all along. I've seen certain applications of maybe Stoic philosophy, maybe kind of more the memento mori idea, the examined life, that turn into a self-help kind of strategy, where it's like, hey, we can dismiss the implications of what we consider bad or negative, but then still fully embrace the personal victory. We can still celebrate that in the same way, in a way that is even self-promoting. And I feel like sometimes that misses the point, because you're trying to have it both ways. Mm-hmm. You're trying to say, hey, I can just sort of do away with what I don't like and say, no, it doesn't matter necessarily. And then you go, but this matters, because see, now a good thing happened since I didn't care so much.
Embrace the suck. Yeah.
That's a big part of it. Embrace the suck, but also, like you kind of said, like, don't excessively savor one thing as good, or else you're subject to the whims of reality, which is just, it is what it is. But you can utilize this kind of board game which we inhabit to move the pieces in a way that communicates to others that you're aware of your connection of the communal self through that. So I like how that all came together. You tied that in with your fraternity, the Freemasons. When you say it's a fraternity, they don't see that, it doesn't see itself as like a religious movement.
No. And one of the things I didn't bring with me, I mean, I wasn't planning to go down this road, but I'm happy to go down this road, one of the things I didn't bring with me is what we call the presentation volume, which is our we give it to members, and it has a lot of like questions and answers. It's an FAQ document, so we have a printed FAQ document, and this is actually available on the website. And every Grand Lodge that you come across is going to say the same thing. The fraternity is not religious, but it is not a religion, but it is inherently religious. It borrows from teachings that are collective. So there's some commonality between us all, that we have a faith basis, but we're not exclusively Christian, nor are we exclusive Muslim or Jewish or anything. We have a broad understanding, and so some of my good friends are Kabbalistic Jews, and they're members of the fraternity, and I respect their understanding of who God is to them, and they respect me because we come from different walks, but we can agree on some of the same things, which are very close to Stoic beliefs. But no, if we're going to say, is it religious or is it a religion? No. Is it religious as is, it references ancient text? Yes. And that's the baseline is that we are a fraternity because we are a group of men who wants to better ourselves and the people around us. As opposed to a explicitly religious community which says you have to believe what we believe to be a part of our identity. So we're a little bit more open door than that.
Maybe something we could do another podcast about sometime.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, why do you think you were the first in your family to seek out the higher education route? Because it seems like you've got like a natural intelligence about you. There was presumably predecessors to you who chose to be farmers, right? Isn't that what you said?
Yeah, a natural intelligence. I've never been told that.
It's not to say you didn't work for it.
No,
it's a cultivated thing, but
natural intelligence.
What changed in the water that said he's going to go this way?
I laugh at that because I failed phonics. That's why I laugh at that.
Yeah, but all intelligence is selective.
Okay,
it?
Yeah. But I mean, there are things that I'm really good at, and there are things that I just don't understand. I mean, every day I always think, and that's what, the beautiful tapestry that is life. I look at these other people that do things and I'm like, oh wow, I wish I could do that. And then I remember, but wait, I know the difference between prevalence and incident. So there's that.
Yeah, and we have a culture that wants everyone to be a Renaissance man.
Oh yeah.
So it's brutal if you're looking around at the things you can't do that other people can do.
Yeah, well, I mean,
I struggle with that.
Well, I would fancy myself a polymath. Someone who dabbles in a lot of different things.
As do I, but you can get so latched onto the things that you can't.
Yeah,
so.
No, that's true too. And I was actually told in high school, it was the first. So in elementary school, I was regarded as, how do I put this nicely and politically correct?
Don't worry about it on my show.
I was the slow kid. I started out, and I was behind the curve. A lot of parent-teacher conferences that I can recall were, my teachers loved me. I was always the happy kid. I was the one that was always excited to be around people, and I didn't, the age-old, I didn't cry when my parents left. There were a lot of us that were kind of independent, only children types that were like, Mom and Dad, you can go, I'm cool, leave me here. But I wasn't regarded as like the go-getter. There was even one point where my parents were concerned that I was going to be held back from my age group, that I didn't have reading skills. And it took a long time for me to develop into that, a lot slower. And for me, and I just honestly and openly, reading was hard. Reading was really hard. I was good at math. I could do anything that when it came to science, I was always just enthralled with science. But for me, sitting down and doing reading in English was just learning that just seemed like it was not, why did it matter, but it was just really hard for me to latch onto as a child. And in retrospect, I want to blame it on the fact that I didn't have Sesame Street from where I grew up, because we didn't have PBS. No, it was just I didn't have a love for it. It wasn't instilled in me. And looking back, I think it's not necessarily just my responsibility, and I don't want to kind of dodge this by saying it was the teacher's fault, but it just wasn't fun. Yeah, and I didn't want to learn it.
Didn't get hooked on it.
Yeah, and then. I I see what you did there, especially with the phonics side of it. Failing phonics was one of the worst parts of being told, hey, this kid's probably going to end up in a menial, type of working with his hands job. He's not really bound for college.
Yeah, and I'm guilty of when I was working to say working in education next to you is ridiculous, but working with kids in a grade school setting, I could be pretty judgmental and just think, yeah, this kid, what are we even investing so many resources in him? It's like, no, you can see literally just a few years later, like things round out. They've had a completely different way of thinking from the others, and not everyone can be systematized.
Yeah,
so
it was, and it's really interesting when you put it that way. Just looking at how, and it's really difficult. Again, it's the individualist perspective and looking at the microcosm of the person, and it's really easy also to be fatalistic in some cases.
Yeah.
That again, it's the resources. It's we're assigning value
exactly.
to something.
It comes back to the value thing.
Yeah, it's the valuation of it wasn't until I blossomed in high school. No, it's I think I came into my own when I was in middle school and learned that I had a love of the theater, I had a love of the stage, and my dad, when I was born, my dad told me this later in life. I didn't know this, but I was a huge baby when I was born. Not to be like a mental thing. I was a big child. And so the doctor who delivered me, basically he turned to my dad and he's like, your son's going to be a linebacker. There's no chance about it. Like he's that big. He's just going to be that big. And you grow up to be 6'1" and you're kind of a big kid even at the time. You're lumbering around school and everybody's like, oh, you must play football. And I was like, no, I'm actually in theater. And so you kind of there's a stereotype there. But I was always the doctors put this idea in my dad's head. My dad was thrilled with it because he was an athlete in high school. I didn't know this till later in life, but he actually had a baseball scholarship. My dad was amazing at baseball, but gave it up to stay home with his family. He turned his back on it because he wanted to take care of his parents, and so he has some college education, but was very high up in his field. He worked for the power company and made supervisor and had a lot of skills that I envy, knowing things that he learned just through life. And my mom was, she would make a great paralegal, but chose to stick close to home and do some things that, made her happy. And I was always driven by mom to go to school, just stay in school, go to college. It was basically that 1990s baby syndrome of, to be successful, you have to go to college.
And you will be successful once you do that.
Yes, and that was you will find every success when you have that diploma, and the doors will open. And that's not true. In hindsight, it was I could have done a lot of things, and I was given a lot of opportunities to go a lot of different directions. But in high school, in my sophomore year of high school, I had a teacher who he just got me. He was a history teacher. And there was just a moment when I said something. I had a response to a question in class that I guess was deep for a high schooler. And somebody said, because everybody in high school called me John. Why does John know everything? John just knows everything. He's got an answer for everything. He should go on Jeopardy. He's just the biggest, brainiest kid. I was not the number one in class by any stretch of the imagination. There were a lot more people who were more motivated than I was. I think I graduated 8 out of 88 in high school. And I was like, okay, so I'm in the top 10 percentile. But, I was thinking, I have a lot of useless information about a lot of different topics.
That's the Jeopardy.
That's the dream for Jeopardy. Yeah. But I had a teacher in history who said, he's going to have a lot of difficulty later in life and it was responding to the student that asked the proverbial question. He said he's going to have a lot of difficulty later in life because he's not going to know what he wants to do with his life. And that was a revelation moment. That was an apocalyptic moment of, yep, this person gets me, because I didn't know what I wanted to do. Mom was saying go to college, become a doctor, or become a pharmacist. Medicine is the key. Medicine's going to make you all the money you ever want. Dad was, you need to get a good job and apprentice somewhere, or you really need to go into sports. You need to be motivated to get into sports. Not that he was pushing me towards professional sports. He was just, you need to be more active. You get out of the theater. The theater's for sissies, kind of thing.
So this teacher told you you're going to have a difficult time.
Yeah. And it was just very open and honest about it. And it hit me. And I wasn't upset about it. I was relieved.
I kind of think, I like that he said that.
I was relieved because it made sense.
It's validation.
Well, yeah. And that was my first experience my first introduction to the word polymath or polymath. Of someone who is poly meaning many, math, the science of numbers, is that this person is kind of a jack of all trades and master of none type person. Polymaths tend to be more of, experts and sages, but I love the term so much that I kind of adopted it, because it was the first opportunity that I realized I don't have to know everything. I need to know how to retain and find information. But by the same token is, how do I, again, give back? And I found that public health was my area. And so, I kind of fell in love with this idea that I can give back. And my master's program, the first thing that I realized was I want to work internationally. I grew up with an aunt on the mission field who teaches English, and went to one of the former USSR countries right after the fall of the Iron Curtain. And she's been there for 28 years. So she lives overseas, and she loves it. I was like, I could do that, but not for that long. And, I got told, you really need to pick, if you're going to work internationally, you need to pick a population and work with them specifically. And I never felt that. And then I found that there are a lot of organizations that do relief efforts and aids, but work with domestic organizations to be sustainable. And they give back to the domestic organizations and give them some of the expertise that they need, but locals run the programs. Mm-hmm. And I fell in love with that. And I was like, all right, now I know what I need to do, because I've got all this random information that I can apply. And then I, was kind of, I don't want to say coasting, but I was sitting on my laurels, having worked internationally in Guatemala doing childhood malnutrition studies, and decided, maybe it's time to look into something else. And my boss was like, hey, check out this program at the school. And I was like, it starts in 12 days. I might be able to get all the paperwork done in time. And jumped into it and never looked back. And, a lot of people say you don't need the doctorate to work in the field. You don't. It's more for the educational purposes. But loved the experience. Loved the people I met. Loved the stretching and the pushing and the pulling to deeper understand things, and kind of just learned a lot more about myself when it came to deadlines, because the key to getting a terminal degree is not your ability to take tests, it's your ability to manage your time. And found out fairly quickly that I needed to be a better time manager, but gave me a lot of experience. And then at the end of that, at the culmination of that, it was funny because I never really had a lot in common with my father. We had the fraternity, and we had, well, no, that's about it. We had the fraternity in common, but I was always one of those that I kind of felt like I let my dad down by not playing baseball, not playing football, giving up on soccer pretty early, doing theater, doing more with education than I did working with my hands or working on the farm even. I'm to this day, I'm still not the type that's like, I'm going to go out and slave under the sun all day long. But being a man of the earth, that's his deep and abiding connection. I really appreciate that, and I really value that. But by the same token, it floored me, and it brought me to tears the day that I graduated. I actually graduated in the winter, and I was out of the country. I was in Israel actually, and when I got back, when I called my mom, my degree was conferred when I was getting on the plane to go to Frankfurt. And I told everybody, but I called my mom right when we were boarding the plane, and I said, the registrar has confirmed my doctorate. You may now call me Dr. Giles. And I was gone for 10 days. And when I got back home, Mom said, your dad has told everyone that his son's a doctor.
Yeah. I mean,
And
it's a source of pride for sure.
yeah, but it floored me because I thought, this is something that he wouldn't care about, and I was so wrong. I was so wrong that he was just so happy about it, and everybody in the family takes it with pride. There's a little bit of sarcasm every time I show up. The doctor's here. The doctor's here. And I was like, yeah, well,
The doctor who also has a strong sense that his impact is not just through going overseas or whatever the scrapbook moments, but the self-betterment and then working locally and impacting what's close to you. You know what I mean? So you're very grounded. So it's funny to make the joke because you're not going to be pretentious about it. So all the more comedy in it.
Well, the age old was the first Earth Day slogan adopted when they first started Earth Day, and I can't quote you the year, but the very first Earth Day slogan: "Think global, act local."
Nice. You don't have to get on a plane for everything.
No, You can. I mean, that doesn't say don't help people by reaching out and going outside of your comfort zone. You learn a lot about yourself.
And there might be some there might be some self betterment in that, but understand where the lines.
Yeah, no, it's and you merge. Right now you can do a whole lot of National Geographic flyovers and learn a lot about different cultures right now. And actually, that was, believe it or not, that was this is again a whole nother podcast, but taking a cultural intelligence course and learning so much about myself and where I have biases, huge issue. And I teach a course on that, I teach cultural intelligence that a lot of people say, I don't have biases. It's not true. Saying you don't have biases is a bias.
Right. We are walking biases.
Yeah, we are because we're the sum total of our experiences shapes our worldview, and that lens expresses. And so I tell people, when you walk down the grocery store aisle, who do you avoid? That's your bias.
It takes a strong self-awareness to be able to recognize that, though. Like, that's not just just asking the question isn't going to get you an honest answer.
No.
I mean, of course, that might show you.
There's a mechanism that Dave Livermore came up with, and he's the creator of the Cultural Intelligence Institute, or CQ as we call it in shorthand. But cultural intelligence has actually taught me that my life has been a lot better than some people, but my life has had some detriments by comparison to some of my peers. Specifically related to when I was younger and the perception that, maybe there was something different about me that I came from maybe a biracial family. So there's some implicit bias in that. And I didn't realize that, but the moment that we got up we did this exercise, and we had to, it was kind of like, put yourselves in order of your birthday and figure out a way to do that without talking or something like that, one of those icebreaker things. This exercise put us in order, and we were in a horseshoe shape, and I looked at it and I went, oh my gosh, it was like a printer running out of ink. And I don't, that sounds so flippant and so disgusting, but it started with the person with the darkest color skin in the room as being the, quote, worst on the scale, and then worst experiences of life, hardest experiences of life. And then as it went around, it got progressively lighter. And I realized then that, the perceptions and the things that are going on around us, while we may grow up in a culture where we appreciate others, that's not the case for everybody. And that was a very humbling moment to realize that just because I value, my peers, my colleagues, even the people who think differently than me, not everybody does that. And it's not because I've done something wrong. It's because back to, the current culture, the current mentality is, where do you place value? Where do you place worth? And it hit me hard in that moment that I needed to really start to think about other people's experiences and their worldviews, because my own is not the only one that's out there.
No, it's incredible how many different lives there are just walking around us, different sets of decades-long experiences. This has been a great talk, and I know that you have got the insight and experience for many more, so we should. But I think this is probably as good of an intro to Jonathan Giles as we can get in an hour and change. So, it's been great. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, no problem. Really appreciate it. Yeah, so if we are recording, what I'll go ahead and do is go on and say the views and opinions expressed in this interview are solely those of the interviewee and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of his employer.
You're welcome to make it as official as you need to. I'll take whatever they give me.
Please,
is what I'm saying.
no.
So,